I'm poor, I want to go visit friends, so a free flight seems amazing. So that doesn't disgust me. So understanding who is really going to be your like your beachhead strategic, segment to go after first is crucial. And almost I guarantee you every company that you believe is like, you know, um, the market dominating, the legendary company, they all started in one area and figured out how do we then get bigger instead of trying to, be for everybody, for all people. Like it doesn't work that way. Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
Absolutely. So what are some of the most significant challenges that you faced in your career, and then how did you overcome them?
I mean, I guess I have like a goldfish brain. I'm like, I don't remember, but of course, like you gotta keep moving forward. I think the things I'll say, I think maybe both when I was on the industry side and also kind of when I after I launched Gray Matter is um again, like most companies think that data, is king and that you can just scale your revenue through more sales. And that doesn't work anymore. And so I think kind of fighting against that inertia of like we have a playbook that works, unwilling to change it. Even if the CEO is like, hey, this is what we're doing, here's why. Seeing kind of the commercial teams go off and do whatever they want to do, that's really frustrating, and I think, that's where we see, the vision of companies kind of crash and burn because they can't really get that alignment, and I saw that again kind of on my own personal experience, so I think having that, like, internal alignment and really having it be part of the DNA is really important, and recognizing when things need to change. I think it's hard to get companies that are especially, companies that are led by founders, right? And co-creators, co-inventors of certain things. Like they just have such passion that they almost like kind of can't let go of the wheel enough to like see that there's a different pathway forward. So I think that's really a change. And I think sometimes I call it gravity, which is like you have a great blueprint, but then people just want to go back to the old way. It's comfortable, it's safe, and they don't realize that they're kind of, undercutting themselves. And then I think the other challenge I would say is facing is just being like in an organization that fundamentally just doesn't agree with like kind of your values, your priorities. And you're thinking like, do I want to continue to invest my time, in this, or do I want to take control of my own life and create something of value that I think would have the biggest impact? And so I think trying to make that change was maybe one of the surprises. I didn't set out to do that. It just was more of an, kind of you have a fork in a road and which one are you going to take? And sometimes making that leap, is scary, but also can unlock amazing, outcomes that you would regret if you had never done it.
I would imagine though too, in your journey with gray matter, you probably started with even a slightly different vision and have morphed throughout time. I mean, I find this in my very young organizations, and yeah, I just would love to hear more about that too.
I think the two biggest changes were when I first started Gray Matter, I was coming out of Allergan, and I had developed a reputation for driving commercial outcomes in the metabolic surgery space, and it became a really hot space, and so really like investors, companies, everyone was calling me to say like, do this for us. And in some ways, I think I maybe niched down too much because all these companies were pre-commercial. No one had revenue. They were going to need to raise more money, and just life market things happen, and like a lot of the companies didn't get that second infusion of cash that they needed to keep going. And all of a sudden, it felt like, oh my gosh, like we have no clients. So I think that was a good lesson to learn about. You need to kind of diversify or figure out what is the composition of clients that make the most sense for gray matter. So I think that was one lesson. I think the other one was that a lot of times companies would come to us because they were in market and they were not seeing the adoption they were looking for. They weren't hitting their revenue targets. The board was mad, stock price was going, tanking, and they needed kind of like a rescue plan.
Mm.
And to do category design is not, you don't just flip a switch. Like it's an intentional like marathon journey. And I think we were trying to help them, but it was almost like, it was a mismatch of timeline versus, process. And so over time, we've realized that really the companies that are best suited for market or for gray matter and for category design are companies that are getting ready to launch a new product. Again, 12 to 18 months out. They could be already a commercial company and just be launching a new product. So they have revenue. Or they could be truly a startup, launching their first product. But I think that's been the biggest aha for me is like, it's not a Hail Mary turnaround plan. It's something that really you should do from the beginning because it impacts your regulatory pathway, your go-to-market plan. It affects everything, and to try to retrofit it is just really difficult.
So let's talk a little bit more about that as well. So in terms of the things that you focus on, do you only focus on medical devices? Do you also work with pharmaceutical companies? What sorts of companies do you work with?
Thanks for asking that. It comes up a lot. We just do life sciences, so nothing outside of healthcare. Because my background was in device, I think just kind of by default, we do a lot in device because we have a lot of experience in surgery and kind of devices innovations. With that said, though, we still do a lot in pharmaceuticals, diagnostics, digital health, and I think it's more of we're less tied to the sector and more tied to, are you really a category design candidate or are you thinking you're just mainly a better product? And if
Mhm.
that's really the go, no go kind of assessment for us. But someone called me and said, like, would you help me? I'm in tech. And I said, like, we could, but we're just probably not as close to the real nuance that there's probably another company that would be better to help them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to clarify because I mean, look for any company that's out there and you're working on like the next generation cancer treatment or you're working on the next generation, um, whatever, diagnostic or whatever, you're going to face some of these battles and having somebody that knows how to unpack this or how to look at things, different and play a little bit more, multidimensional than just taking one straight path to try and get your product out there, which, look, you could take a tactical approach, but the reality is if there's a lot of change management involved, it sounds to me like your approach is very thoughtful in terms of, how people are going to think about things and how you get the mind share to come along with you.
Yeah, we say we're intellectual capitalists. Like, basically, we get paid to think, basically, honestly. And so, I kind of feel like um, it is this idea of we're not for everybody. That's okay. I like country music, and there's a group called the Brothers Osbornes, and it says we're for some, we're not for everyone. And I'm like, that's us. And I think it's a little bit like dating. Like you need to make sure you're compatible, and so we're not afraid to say like, hey, we're not the right company for you. There's a funny story. There was a company we were working with. It was those early days, and they said, "We're fine being the number 3 player." And I was like, you know, I was like, "I can't in good faith, like, it's not in my DNA." I was like, I can't do this." Yeah, you have the ability to be number 1 in a different category, if you just think about this differently.
Right. So, can you share an example of a successful project or client that you've worked with and the impact that it had on their business?
Sure. I mean, we I guess the good news is that we're coming up almost on our 20th year. So we have a lot of companies I think that we could point to as successful. I'll use one because it's in the AI space. I feel like everyone's talking about AI right now, but this was a company that was founded on using AI for imaging interpretation. So using AI to help radiologists read like X-rays and CTs and things of that nature. And so, they'd been around for a number of years and they weren't kind of getting market traction. And while AI might seem like it's a nascent space, it's actually getting quite crowded. A lot of companies are trying to enter the space. And I think most of the companies were really trying to use AI in imaging interpretation to triage patients in the emergency room. Like, how do we prioritize people that need to be seen, before other people and kind of